Dust jumped under Colt Mercer's boots as he spurred his horse through the rodeo gate mid-run. The crowd roared. Champion of 3 states. A silver buckle heavy on his belt. A wedding scar pale on the finger where a ring used to live. Then the gates opened again. A lone woman stepped onto the dirt. Travel coat. Dusty valise. Eyes locked on Colt Mercer like she already owned the moment. "I'm your mail-order bride." The crowd fell silent. Because men in the stands knew the truth. And Colt Mercer's life was about to split wide open. Before we ride deeper into the story, hit subscribe, ring the bell, so you'll never miss another ride through the legends of the Wild West. Now, let's get back to the trail. Dust still hung in the rodeo air after the announcer's voice died. Men leaned over the rail. Women shaded their eyes beneath wide hats. No one spoke. Colt Mercer sat tall in the saddle, reins loose in one scarred hand. The horse beneath him shifted. Restless. Colt did not move. The woman stood alone in the dirt where the gate hands usually worked. Travel coat worn thin. Valise hanging from tired fingers. Wind pushed a strand of dark hair across her face, but she did not brush it away. Her eyes stayed on Colt Mercer, the champion cowboy who had just frozen a rodeo crowd silent. Somewhere behind the stands a mule brayed. Boots creaked on the boards. Still no one laughed. The rodeo announcer cleared his throat. "Ma'am, you might want to." She lifted a folded paper. Not trembling. Just steady. The paper snapped softly in the prairie wind. Colt swung down from the saddle. One boot hitting dirt. Then the other. Heavy. Certain. The horse snorted and stepped aside as he walked toward her. Spurs chimed once. Then stopped. He did not take the paper. Did not look at it. Just looked at her. A long look. Like a man measuring weather before a storm. "Lady," he said quietly. "You've got the wrong man." Murmurs moved through the crowd like dry grass catching flame. Someone laughed. Another voice whispered his name. She didn't turn. Didn't shrink from the attention. "My name is Eliza Hartwell." Her voice carried further than it should have. Clear. Plain. Like she had practiced saying it 100 miles down the trail. "You placed the advertisement in Denver." She unfolded the paper slowly. "Seeking a respectable wife willing to work ranch life beside an honest man." The paper rustled. Dust blew across Colt's boots. He finally looked at the page. Just one glance. Then away again. "I didn't write that." Eliza steadied his face. The sunburn. The hard jaw. The pale scar where a wedding ring once lived. Something in her expression shifted. Not doubt. Understanding. Behind them the rodeo crowd pressed closer to the rail. Waiting. Colt felt it. The weight of 100 watching eyes. He hated crowds. Always had. "Best get back on that wagon road," he said. "Before folks make a circus out of this." Eliza Hartwell closed the paper. Slow. Careful. "I crossed 3 states to reach this ranch." Wind lifted dust between them. "I'm not leaving without hearing the truth." A board creaked behind the stands. 2 men near the gate whispered. Colt heard the name drift through the dust. Barlow. The rodeo sponsor. The man who owned half the land around the valley. Colt's jaw tightened. He stepped closer to Eliza. Low voice. "For your own sake, miss. You picked the wrong cowboy." She didn't step back. Didn't blink. "Then show me where the right one is." The wind moved across the rodeo grounds. And Colt Mercer felt something shift in the quiet of his life. The crowd thinned slow after the rodeo. Dust settled over the arena like tired fog. Men drifted back toward wagons. Horses snorted in the evening light. Colt Mercer saddled his bay without hurry. Leather creaked. Reins slid through his hands. He did not look at the woman standing beside the rail. But he knew she was still there. Eliza Hartwell had not moved since the last rider left the ring. The valise rested at her boots now. She watched everything. Quiet. Studying. Like a traveler learning a new country. Colt mounted. The bay tossed its head once. Then stilled. He turned toward the open road beyond the rodeo grounds. "Town's that way," he said without looking back. "Stage leaves in the morning." Eliza didn't pick up her valise. Didn't step toward town. Instead she looked past him. Toward the long stretch of hills where the Mercer ranch lay. "You ride that direction every night?" Colt said nothing. The bay shifted beneath him. Wind moved across the empty arena. Tin signs clattered against the rail. Eliza walked to the center of the dirt ring. Boots leaving small prints in the dust beside the deep marks of bucking horses. "You're not surprised," she said softly. "About the advertisement?" Colt's jaw tightened. He swung the horse toward the gate. "Eliza." First time he used her name. Low. Tired. Somebody made a mistake. She studied his hand on the reins. The pale band around his finger. Skin that had not seen sunlight in years. "That wasn't a mistake," she said. The bay stamped once. Colt rode through the gate. Did not turn his head. But the sound of her footsteps followed. Slow. Steady. The road out of the rodeo grounds ran through dry grass and cottonwoods. Evening cooled the air. Crickets started their quiet music. Colt rode ahead, expecting the sound of her boots to fade. It didn't. After a mile he stopped the horse. The silence stretched. He turned. Eliza stood in the road behind him. Valise still in hand. Dust on the hem of her coat. "You planning to follow me clear to Wyoming?" he asked. Her breath showed faint in the cooling air. "I'm planning to reach the man who sent for a wife. That ain't me." She walked closer. Close enough now to see the lines around his eyes. The old exhaustion behind them. "Then someone used your name?" "Yes." "And you don't care who?" Colt didn't answer. The bay flicked its ears. A hawk cried somewhere over the ridge. Eliza's gaze drifted down again. To his left hand. The scar where the ring once lived. "You were married," she said. Not a question. A statement. Colt's shoulders stiffened. Wind moved through the cottonwoods with a long sigh. He nudged the horse forward. But she spoke again. "She died." Colt stopped. Slow. Careful. Like a man hearing a rifle click behind him. He turned the horse halfway. Just enough to see her. "How would you know that?" Eliza lifted the folded advertisement. The paper was worn from the trail. "You asked for a woman who could run a ranch." She lowered the paper. "Men who have never lost someone don't write things like that." Colt stared at her. A long moment. Then he swung down from the saddle. Boots hit dirt. Hard. "You don't know a thing about me." His voice stayed quiet. But the anger underneath it was old. Heavy. Eliza didn't flinch. Behind them the rodeo grounds had gone silent. No lanterns. No music. Just prairie wind. "You kept the ring," she said. Colt's hand closed. Tight. "The scar says you wore it long after she was gone." The words hung in the air. Sharp as barbed wire. For a moment it looked like Colt might walk away. Or mount up and ride. Instead he stepped past her. Leading the horse. The road curved toward the dark line of hills. "Eliza Hartwell." His voice came rough now. "You don't want anything to do with my life." She turned slowly. Watching him walk. "You didn't deny it." Colt stopped again. Farther down the road. Back still to her. The bay lowered its head to crop dry grass. The prairie darkened by the minute. "She drowned," Colt said at last. 3 words. Flat. Like stones dropped into deep water. Eliza said nothing. She went under in spring flood. Wind brushed through the cottonwoods again. Colt rested his hand against the saddle horn. River took the bridge. His voice lowered. I was riding rodeo 2 counties over. Silence swallowed the road. No crickets now. No hawk. Just the quiet weight of the prairie night. Eliza understood then. Why the ring scar had stayed. Why the advertisement had asked for a woman strong enough to run a ranch. Why the man in front of her had tried to send her away without even reading the contract. Because somewhere inside him, Colt Mercer still lived beside a river that never gave back what it took. Eliza stepped closer. Boots soft on the dust. I didn't come to replace her. Colt didn't turn. I came because someone wrote for help. The wind lifted her coat slightly, carrying the smell of dry sage and cooling earth. If you didn't send that advertisement, she said quietly, then someone wanted me here. Colt finally looked back. Slow. Eyes dark in the fading light. For the first time, he seemed unsure of something. And far away across the valley, a single lantern flickered to life on the Mercer Ranch. The Mercer Ranch sat low against the hills. A long house of weathered boards. Barn leaning slightly toward the wind. Corrals empty except for 2 saddle horses and a gray gelding chewing slow in the dusk. The lantern in the window burned steady. Colt Mercer rode through the gate without a word. The bay horse knew the way. Eliza Hartwell followed behind him on foot. Her boots were dusted white from the long road. The prairie night had turned cold. Wind slid down from the hills and carried the smell of sage and dry earth. Colt swung down near the hitch rail. The horse breathed steam into the cooling air. He tied the reins. Still didn't look at her. Eliza stopped beside the rail. Her eyes moved over the ranch yard. Broken fence slats. Loose boards on the barn door. Tools leaning where they had been dropped and forgotten. A place run by one man too long. Colt lifted the saddle from the bay and carried it toward the barn. You can sleep in the tack room tonight, he said. His voice flat. Practical. Stage leaves at sunrise. Eliza set her valise down. Is that your final word? Colt hung the saddle on a peg. Leather thumped softly against wood. Best offer you're getting. She stepped inside the barn doorway. The smell of hay and horse sweat filled the air. Moonlight slipped through the slats in pale strips. You read the contract? No. Then you don't know what it says. Colt pulled a curry brush from the wall and began working dust from the base flank. Long strokes. Steady. I know enough. Eliza unfolded the paper again. The lantern light from the ranch house window glowed faint through the barn door. This says a rancher named Colt Mercer asked for a wife willing to work his land beside him. She paused. A wife with no fear of hard seasons. Colt kept brushing. Dust rose around the horse's flank. You got courage riding this far alone, he said. But that paper don't belong to me. Eliza steadied him for a moment. Then she folded the contract again. You need help. The brush stopped. Just once. Then started again. You don't know this ranch. I know broken fence lines when I see them. The horse shifted. Colt moved to the other side. Eliza. Quiet. Firm. People in town will talk. They already are. He couldn't argue that. She stepped farther into the barn. Her boots crunched softly on old straw. 3 states I rode through, she said. Every mile thinking the man waiting here meant what he wrote. Colt hung the brush back on its hook. The barn went still. Whoever wrote that advertisement made you a promise I won't keep. Eliza tilted her head slightly. You won't marry me. No. You won't read the contract. No. But you'll let me sleep in the tack room. Colt said nothing. Wind rattled the loose barn door. Eliza looked around again. At the sagging rafters. The empty stall that once held more horses. The tools left half-used. This ranch used to run bigger. Colt turned toward the door. You're observant. Someone sold stock. He stopped walking. The night outside had gone quiet. Far across the valley a coyote cried. Low. Lonely. Bad seasons, Colt said. Or bad neighbors? The words hung in the barn air. Colt didn't answer. He stepped out into the yard. Eliza followed. The lantern in the house window flickered. Inside waited a single table. One chair pulled out. The quiet of a man living alone too long. Colt picked up her valise. Not gently. Not rough. Just practical. 3 weeks, he said. Eliza blinked. What? 3 weeks till the rodeo circuit moves south. He carried the valise toward the tack room. You stay till then. The wind tugged her coat as she walked beside him. And after that? You ride the stage. He set the valise inside the small room. A narrow cot. One wool blanket. The smell of saddle oil and dust. You'll help fix fence, Colt said. Cook if you know how. Feed horses when I'm riding. Eliza leaned against the doorframe. That sounds like ranch work. That's what it is. And the wife part? Colt looked at her then. Straight on. Eyes hard. That part ain't happening. Silence filled the little room. Then Eliza stepped inside and set the contract on the small wooden table. The paper lay flat beneath the lantern light. We'll see, she said quietly. Colt's jaw tightened. But he didn't argue. Outside the wind moved across the prairie again. Cold. Endless. And somewhere beyond the dark hills. Men who watched the Mercer ranch began to hear that Colt Mercer now had a woman living under his roof. Morning came cold across the Mercer ranch. Frost silvered the fence rails. The hills held the last blue shadows of night. Colt Mercer was already in the yard. Splitting kindling beside the pump. Each swing of the axe sharp in the still air. The bay horse watched from the corral. Steam drifting from its nose. The tack room door creaked open. Eliza Hartwell stepped out wrapped in a borrowed wool coat. Her breath showed pale in the morning. She paused a moment. Listening. A ranch waking slow. Wind brushing dry grass. The quiet groan of barn boards settling in the cold. Colt did not look up. The axe rose. Fell. Wood split clean. Eliza crossed the yard and lifted the bucket beside the pump. Water clanked into the metal pail. Cold enough to sting the fingers. Colt noticed the movement. Just a glance. Nothing more. But when she carried the bucket toward the corral he didn't stop her. The gray gelding pushed its nose over the rail. Curious. Eliza poured water into the trough. The horse drank slow. Easy. Like it had known her longer than a morning. Colt set the axe aside. You've handled horses before. She wiped cold water from her hands. My father raised them. The gray lifted its head. Watching her. Colt studied the animal. Then her. You didn't lie about the work. No. Silence settled again. Not sharp this time. Just the quiet of two people sharing the same cold morning. Smoke began curling from the ranch house chimney. Eliza had already lit the stove. Colt noticed that too. They walked toward the house together. Boots crunching frost. Inside the kitchen the warmth felt almost strange. The iron stove glowed red. Coffee simmered in a battered pot. A skillet waited beside it. Eliza moved easily around the small room, setting tin cups on the table. Colt hung his hat by the door. He watched her without speaking. Noticing things. The way she kept the kettle lid cracked for steam. The way she stacked the wood neat beside the stove. Small habits. A person who knew kitchens. Breakfast was simple. Eggs. Salt pork. Black coffee. They ate without talking. Just the sound of forks on tin plates. Outside a hammering noise carried across the yard. Eliza paused. "Loose board on the barn," she said. Colt nodded once. He had heard it too. When they stepped outside again, the wind had picked up. The barn door slammed against its hinge. Hard. Eliza grabbed the loose plank before it tore free. Colt fetched nails from the shed. They worked side by side, hammer passing between them, wood settling back into place. No wasted motion. The kind of work that spoke without words. Later they rode the fence line. Colt on the bay, Eliza on the gray gelding. The prairie stretched white and pale under the winter sun. Miles of wire fence sagged in places, posts leaning where frost had pushed them crooked. Eliza slid down from the saddle without waiting, pulled the wire tight with both hands. Colt watched her brace her boots in the dirt. Strong. Determined. Not the delicate mail order bride the town must have expected. They rode until noon. Then farther. The land grew quiet as the hills opened toward the valley road. Eliza noticed the tracks first. Fresh wagon ruts cutting across the pasture edge. Colt followed them with his eyes. His jaw tightened. Someone drove through here. Yes. She pointed toward a broken fence rail near the road. The wire's been cut. Colt dismounted, kneeling beside the post. The cut was clean. Deliberate. Not weather damage. Eliza crouched beside him. Cattle thieves? Maybe. But his voice carried doubt. He looked toward the distant road, where dust sometimes rose from wagons heading toward the rodeo grounds, or toward the ranch owned by a man who held too much land. Eliza stood slowly. "Someone testing your fence line." Colt said nothing. He repaired the wire, hands moving quick and practiced. But the quiet had changed. When they rode back toward the house, the sun hung low over the hills. Cold gold light across the pasture. Smoke rising from the chimney again. Eliza tied the gray to the rail and stepped down. Colt lingered in the saddle, watching the land, watching the road. Something in his shoulders had tightened. Eliza followed his gaze. Who would want to test your ranch? Colt finally slid from the saddle. He rubbed the horse's neck once. Hard. Like grounding himself. "There's a man named Barlow," he said. "Owns half the valley." Eliza waited. Colt led the bay toward the barn. "He sponsors the rodeo." "And the other half of the valley?" Colt paused at the barn door. The lantern inside cast a warm glow across the floorboards. "That's what he's been trying to buy." The wind moved across the darkening prairie. Cold. Patient. And somewhere out beyond the road, someone had already begun testing the strength of the Mercer ranch. The next morning came under a low gray sky. No sunrise worth naming. Just cold light spreading slow across the Mercer ranch. Colt was in the south pasture before breakfast, rebuilding the cut section of fence with new cedar posts. His coat hung open, hat pulled low, hammer striking wood in a hard steady rhythm. Eliza carried the wire rolls from the wagon. Gloves rough with splinters now. Boots muddied from the thaw along the creek bed. They worked without much speech. Post. Wire. Staple. Pull. The fence line straightened one section at a time. The kind of labor that made a person forget their own thoughts for a while. Then the sound came. Wagon wheels. Not on the ranch road. On the county road beyond the rise. Colt stopped mid-swing. Listened. Eliza did too. The wagon rolled closer. Slow. Heavy. No cattle bells. No feed sacks. Just the long dry groan of axles underweight. A black rig came into view over the ridge. Polished enough to catch what little light the sky offered. Two matched horses. Driver in a dark coat. No ranch wagon looked like that. Colt set the hammer down. His face went still. The wagon stopped at the boundary fence. Not crossing. Not yet. A man stepped down from the seat. Tall. broad through the chest. Black gloves. Town boots too clean for country mud. He stood on the far side of the fence and looked over the Mercer land as if measuring boards in a lumberyard. Eliza did not need an introduction. This was a man used to taking inventory before he took possession. Barlow, Colt said. Just the name. Nothing more. The man lifted two fingers in something almost like a greeting. Not friendly. Not warm. Just ownership wearing manners. Mercer. His voice carried across the pasture with ease. Then his eyes moved to Eliza. Slow. Interested. So the talk in town was true. Eliza kept hold of the wire roll. Did not lower her gaze. Barlow smiled without showing any kindness in it. I'd heard you finally put a woman under your roof. Colt walked to the fence. Not fast. Not slow. Every step deliberate. She's none of your business. Barlow rested one gloved hand on the top rail. Everything adjoining my range becomes my business sooner or later. The wind moved through the grass. Cold. Thin. Eliza felt the meaning in those words before she fully understood the shape of it. Barlow looked past Colt toward the barn. Toward the house. Toward the spread of land trying hard not to look like it was struggling. Still patching fences by hand, he said. Still too proud to sell. Colt said nothing. Barlow nodded toward the south field. And now stock are wandering through cut wire. His smile sharpened. Dangerous thing for a rodeo champion to lose control of his own boundaries. Eliza saw Colt's right hand close into a fist once. Open again. Small movement. Heavy meaning. You cut that fence? She asked. Barlow turned to her as though noticing she could speak. Ma'am. His tone was smooth. Town polished. I own enough land not to steal another man's pasture by the inch. Then he looked back at Colt. But the bank is less patient than I am. The wagon driver stayed silent. A shape in dark wool. Watching. Barlow reached into his coat and drew out an envelope. Cream paper. Sealed. He slid it between the rails onto the Mercer side. Thought I'd spare you the ride into town. Then he stepped back toward his wagon. The note comes due in 10 days. Eliza's eyes dropped to the envelope in the grass. Colt did not bend to pick it up. Barlow climbed onto the wagon seat. Reins in hand. Sell now, Mercer, and I might leave you the house. His gaze flicked once more toward Eliza. And enough dignity to keep your supper warm. The wagon turned. Wheels biting mud. By the time the sound faded over the rise, the pasture felt colder than before. Eliza bent and picked up the envelope. The paper was thick. Official. The seal stamped red. She held it out. Colt took it without thanks. Without looking at her. He broke the seal with his thumb and read the page once. Only once. Then folded it in half. In quarters. Smaller. Like crushing something without using both hands. How much? Eliza asked. Colt tucked the paper into his coat pocket. Enough. That isn't an answer. He grabbed the hammer from the ground and drove a staple into the fence too hard. The wire sang. It's mine to answer. They finished the section in silence. But it was not the silence of work anymore. It was pressure. Bank pressure. Land pressure. The kind that rode a man's shoulders until he stooped under it. By noon the sky had opened into a mean sleet. Small hard pellets striking the brim of Colt's hat. Ticking against the wire. Eliza pulled her coat tighter and followed him back toward the house with the empty wagon rattling behind them. The ranch looked different now. Smaller somehow. As if Barlow's visit had shrunk it. Inside, the kitchen held warmth from the stove. Coffee still hot in the pot. Bread wrapped in cloth. Eliza moved straight to the kettle. Set it back over the flame. The familiar motions made the room feel human again. Colt stood near the door, dripping sleet onto the floorboards. Not removing his coat. Not sitting. Just staring at the small square of window over the sink. "You should sell the rodeo buckles," Eliza said softly. His head turned. "Slow. They're silver. They're mine. So is the note." The words landed hard. Colt crossed to the table and laid both hands flat against it. Not slamming. Just bracing. "The rodeo circuit keeps this place breathing." "For how long?" He looked at her then. Really looked. Not angry because she was wrong. Angry because she had found the wound. "Eliza." His voice stayed low. "Do not start arranging my life." She met his gaze across the table. "Someone already has." The room went still. Only the hiss of the kettle. The soft crack of stove iron settling. Outside, sleet tapped the window like thrown seed. Colt pulled the folded bank notice from his coat and tossed it onto the table between them. Eliza opened it. "Read." Her face did not change much. But her eyes sharpened. "Debt against the ranch. Late fees. A demand for payment before transfer of claim." And at the bottom, in smaller print, the bank agent's name. Not Barlow. But tied to him all the same. Barlow's money reached farther than his fences. "You knew this was coming," she said. Colt took off his hat at last and set it on the chair. His hair was damp with sleet. "I've known for months." "And you said nothing." "To who?" She looked around the room. One table. One stove. One extra cup now sitting beside the coffee pot. The whole house answered for him. That evening the sleet turned to freezing rain. The barn roof ticked all through dusk. Colt went out twice to check the horses. The second time Eliza followed with a lantern. The light swung gold through the wet dark. Inside the barn, the animals shifted and blew warm breath into the cold air. Colt laid a hand against the bay's neck, steadying the horse. Or himself. Eliza held the lantern higher. The firelight from the house was only a distant glow now. Small. Fragile. 10 days, she said. Colt nodded once. Rain drummed harder overhead. And after that? He looked toward the barn doors. Toward the invisible fields. Toward the land a richer man was already circling. After that, Colt said, Barlow stopped asking. Freezing rain passed in the night. Morning left the ranch glazed in silver. Fence rails shone pale. The pump handle wore a skin of ice. Each step across the yard broke with a brittle crack. Colt Mercer was already gone. His bay horse and saddle were missing from the rail. A note sat beside the cold stove. 3 words. Back by noon. Eliza folded the scrap and tucked it into her apron pocket. The kitchen held the shape of his absence. 1 cup left unrinsed. 1 chair angled back. Ash settling quiet in the stove belly. She fed kindling into the iron mouth and brought the room to life again. Fire first. Then coffee. Then work. Outside, the ranch looked tired under the ice. She fed the gelding. Checked the hens. Broke skim ice from the trough with the back of a shovel. The world answered with hard little sounds. Metal on frost. Buckets knocking wood. A rooster complaining at the cold. Routine steadied her place. She understood that. A house with work in it did not feel abandoned. By mid-morning she went into the barn for lamp oil and found the old desk. It sat half hidden behind sacks of feed and a broken harness tree. Oak darkened by dust. 1 drawer warped. 1 leg shimmed with folded leather. Not a ranch hand's desk. A bookkeeping desk. She paused. Looked around the empty barn. Horse breath drifted wide in the dimness. The smell was hay. Leather. Cold boards. She set the lamp aside and wiped her sleeve across the top. Dust smeared away. Under it lay scratches. Ink stains. A man had once done figures here. Not often lately. The top drawer stuck. She worked it loose with both hands. Inside were receipts. Old rodeo handbills. A bundle of letters tied in fading blue ribbon. She did not touch the letters. Not yet. Under them sat folded statements from the bank. Neat. Unanswered. Her fingers moved through them slowly. Dates. Amounts. Interest. Renewal marks. One page in particular carried a different hand at the bottom. Not the clerk's neat script from the most recent notice. A hard slanted signature. W. Harlan Barlow. Not on the front. On the transfer line and back. She frowned. The paper crackled softly in her hands. The bank notice at the house had looked official. Distant. This was something else. Barlow had not only waited for the debt. He had bought a piece of it. Bootsteps sounded outside. Eliza straightened fast. Heart-kicking ones. But it was only the gray gelding shifting in the stall. Wind moved the barn door and set the loose hinge tapping. Still, she listened a moment. Then looked back down. More papers. Older ones. Loan extensions. Feed bills. A receipt for lumber never delivered. And under those, a map of adjoining parcels. Mercer land in faded brown ink. Barlow range in black. 3 neighboring ranches marked with red X strokes at the corners. Each one dated. Each one taken within 2 years. She knew enough numbers to feel a pattern before she could explain it. Barlow pressed. The bank waited. The ranch failed. Then the land changed hands. Clean on paper. Dirty in practice. She took the bundle to the house. Set it on the kitchen table. Opened the curtains for more light. The winter sun came weak through the glass. Just enough. She sorted everything by date. Bank letters to one side. Receipts to the other. Maps flat in the center beneath the sugar bowl. The room changed around her. Not warm now. Sharp. Intent. A place of looking. At noon the front door opened and Colt came in with cold on his coat and mud to his knees. He stopped at once. His eyes moved from the stove to the table. To the papers spread across it like a trial. Eliza did not stand. Did you know he signed the transfer line? Colt shut the door behind him. Slow. What? She held up the page. Barlow. He crossed the room in 3 long strides and took the paper. His face gave nothing at first. Then less than nothing. The kind of stillness that meant trouble had found its name. He told you not to go through my things. You told me not to arrange your life. Her voice stayed even. This is not that. Colt set the paper down. Too careful. You went into the barn desk. Yes. His jaw worked once. The room narrowed. Fire ticking in the stove. Wind scratching at the window. A man who hated being seen. A woman who had just seen too much. That desk was Mary's, he said. Not loud. Worse than loud. Eliza's hand left the next bundle at once. The blue ribbon on the letters suddenly looked too personal to breathe near. I didn't open the letters. He stood there a long moment. Wet hat in one hand. Silence between them. Then he looked down at the map. At the pages. At Barlow's name. Something in him shifted from anger toward something colder. He pulled out a chair and sat. Heavy. Like a man finally letting weight touch bone. Eliza slid the receipt across to him. Look at the dates. He did. One by one. Feed note. Fence lumber. Bridge tax. Loan extension. Each time Mercer land lost stock or weather hit hard, Barlow's name appeared somewhere nearby. Buying paper. Buying time. Buying men. Colt's thumb pressed against the edge of the map. He did this to Porter's place, he said. Quiet. Then to the Weller's spread. Eliza nodded toward the red X marks. And now yours. He stared at the marks. The old grief in him had always faced backward. Toward the river. Toward the woman he could not save. This was different. This wound looked forward. Toward the man coming to finish what Dad had started. A wagon rattled past on the county road. They both lifted their heads. Only a peddler this time. Bell jangling faint through the cold. But the interruption broke something loose. Eliza reached for the newest notice. The due date is 10 days. Yes. These earlier papers show he has been buying pieces of your debt for months. Colt rubbed a hand over his mouth. Tired motion. He sponsors the bank dinners. He sponsors the rodeo. He sponsors half the men who vote in town. The truth sat there plain as iron. Not one thread. A whole system. Law in a clean collar. Greed in polished boots. Eliza laid her finger on the transfer line. If he already holds the paper, then the bank is only his glove. Colt looked at her. Really looked. Not as a burden. Not as a mistake dropped on his porch by a lie. As someone who had found a track he had ridden past too many times. You see numbers quick, he said. My father lost a mill that way. The words came out before she could soften them. Colt said nothing. But his eyes changed a little. Not pity. Recognition. The winter light faded early. By late afternoon the kitchen glowed gold from lamplight and stove flame. Paper still covered the table. Colt brought down an old tin box from the high shelf and set it beside the map. Inside were rodeo purses. Tax receipts. Contracts from years back. And one ledger with Mary Mercer's hand kneed across the first page. Eliza waited before touching it. Colt nodded once. Permission. Together they worked through the ledger line by line. Prize money. Horse feed. Bridge repairs. Stud fees. Then a short entry from nearly a year ago. Payment withheld pending sponsor review. Sponsor. No name written. No need. A few lines later came another note in Mary's hand. Ask Barlow again. Eliza felt the room go colder though the stove burned hot. He was squeezing you before the bank note. Colt closed the ledger gently. Too gently. As if force might break something already cracked beyond mending. Mary handled the books after the river took the lower pasture, he said. He told her the rodeo committee needed time. Eliza looked at the page. At the neat careful script ending months before her death. Barlow had not only circled the ranch. He had waded through grief. Waded through silence. Waded through a widow or two numb to keep watching the figures. Outside, dusk settled blue over the yard. The first star showed above the hill. Inside, the table no longer held scattered papers. It held a shape. A scheme. A road into the truth. Eliza set the latest bank notice beside the old ledger and the parcel map. 3 pieces. 1 picture. We can prove pressure, she said. Colt's eyes stayed on Barlow's signature. Pressure ain't enough. No. She met his gaze across the warm table and the cold facts spread between them. But it is where a man like him begins to bleed. For the first time since she had come to the ranch, Colt Mercer did not look away. The wind changed after sundown. It came down off the ridge in long cold breaths. The kind that found cracks in boards and slid under doors and made a house feel less certain than it had by daylight. Colt latched the shutters himself. Checked the barn twice. Brought the ledger, the parcel map, and every paper with Barlow's name into the house and locked them in the tin box beneath the bed. Eliza watched all of it without speaking. The stove glowed red. The kitchen smelled of stew and wood smoke. For a few quiet minutes the room almost felt safe. Then the bay horse screamed. Not a whinny. Not a restless stamp. A sharp tearing cry from the barnyard that sent both of them moving before the sound had finished. Colt grabbed the lantern. Eliza the heavy iron poker by the stove. The front door slammed open against the wind. Colt rushed in. The yard lay black except for the lantern swinging gold. The horses were in chaos. The gray gelding slammed against the stall rail. The bay reared against its tether, eyes rolling white. Colt ran hard through the mud. Lantern light bounced wild across the barn wall. "Eliza, hold that light steady." She reached the stall as he did. The smell hit first. Blood. Then the sight. The bay's front leg was gashed deep along the tendon. Not a kick wound. Too clean. Too deliberate. The horse trembled, blowing hard, blood running dark down into the straw. Colt's face changed. Not panic. Something colder. He set the lantern down low and put both hands against the horse's neck. Steadying it. Steadying himself. Eliza lifted the light. There in the stall door frame, half hidden by shadow, a nail had been driven inward at shin height. Fresh. Cruel. Placed to tear when the horse lunged. "Someone said it," she said. Colt yanked the nail free and threw it into the dirt. His jaw had gone hard enough to cut. Outside, hoofbeats sounded once. Farther off. Riding away through the dark. Colt's head snapped toward the yard. He almost ran after it. Eliza caught his sleeve. "Your horse first." He stopped. Only because she was right. The bay shuddered against him. He pressed his forehead briefly to the animal's neck. Then the work began. Water boiled. Bandages ripped from old linen. Whiskey poured over the wound while the horse fought the pain in the barn filled with the raw sound of a creature trying not to break. Eliza held the lantern in the reins. Colt cleaned and wrapped and tied the bandage tight. Blood stained both their hands. The wind pushed through the cracks and made the lantern flame bend. When it was done, the bay stood trembling but upright. That was something. Not enough. But something. Colt stepped out of the stall and looked into the dark yard. Long. Silent. Like a man reading a sentence across the night. Eliza followed his gaze. The ranch looked different now. Not poor. Not tired. Attacked. Whoever had ridden in knew exactly where to strike. Not the house. Not the fences. The horse he rode in competition. The horse that earned money. The horse that kept the ranch breathing. "Barlow," Eliza said. Colt did not answer. But his silence agreed. They had just reached the house again when the second blow came. Smoke. Thin at first. Then thicker. Not from the stove. From outside. Eliza saw it through the kitchen window. A dark ribbon climbing against the night beyond the barn. Colt. He was already moving. This time he took the shotgun from above the door. No hesitation. They ran toward the training shed beyond the main barn. The smaller structure where saddles, roping dummies, and rodeo gear were kept dry. Flames licked along the back wall. Orange in the black. Hungry. Wind-fed. Someone had piled oil-soaked hay against the boards and lit it fast. Colt shoved the lantern into Eliza's hand and tore the water barrels loose from the side trough. She ran for the pump. Hands numb in the cold. Bucket after bucket. Water slamming against flame. Steam hissing up white. The fire caught one beam inside and began chewing its way upward. Leather tack cracked in the heat. A saddle blanket curled black. Colt kicked the burning hay away from the wall with his boots and beat at the sparks with a wet canvas tarp. The shotgun lay in the mud near his feet. Forgotten now. No time to chase ghosts while the place still could be saved. Wind drove sparks toward the main barn. Eliza saw them first. Roof. Colt looked up. Swore under his breath. Then climbed. No ladder. Just the side rail and the low support beam, hauling himself up with hands already burned red from heat and ice water. She kept pumping. Kept throwing. Each bucket heavier than the last. The firelight made the yard look like war. Orange flame. Black smoke. Gold lantern swinging from a fence post. And beyond the glow, the rest of the prairie watching in cold silence. At last the flames broke. Collapsed inward. The back wall charred black but standing. The roof singed. Part of the shed lost. Not all of it. Colt jumped down hard into the mud, breathing like a man who had fought something with teeth. His coat sleeve smoked near the cuff. Eliza slapped it out with her bare hand. For one moment neither of them moved. The night rang with little sounds. Water dripping. Wood settling. The horses still restless in the barn. Then Colt bent and picked something from the mud near the burned hay. A silver match safe. Fancy. Too fine for ranch hands. Engraved with a single letter. B. He stared at it. Not long. Long enough. Then closed his hand around it until the edges bit skin. He wants the note due with no horse and no gear, Eliza said quietly. Colt looked toward the dark county road. He wants me finished before the final rodeo. The words came out flat. Certain. This was no longer pressure. No longer paper. This was a man crossing from law into fire. They brought what could be saved into the house before dawn. Half-burned tack. The surviving saddles. The tin box of documents. Eliza brewed coffee black enough to hold a man upright. Colt stood at the sink washing soot from his hands. The water turned gray. Then black. Then pink where the burn split open. He said nothing. Not while she wrapped his bomb. Not while the house slowly warmed again. Not while the first week light crept into the east. At sunrise the ranch yard looked wounded. Smoke drifting from the ruined shed. Mud churned by boots and buckets. The bay horse standing three-legged in the barn, bandaged and hurt and alive. Colt stepped onto the porch with the silver match safe in one hand. Eliza came beside him. The prairie lay pale and still. Almost innocent. He opened his fist and looked down at the engraved B. The old Colt Mercer would have stayed quiet. Would have taken the blow. Would have let grief do what fear could not. But the man standing on that porch had watched a horse bleed and a home burn in the same night. Something had changed. Slowly, he closed the match safe and slid it into his coat pocket. Then he looked at Eliza. Eyes tired. Burned raw. Awake in a new way. He just made a mistake, Colt said. And this time there was nothing quiet left in his voice. Morning came thin and pale after the fire. Smoke still drifted from the blackened shed boards. The yard smelled of wet ash and burned leather. Colt Mercer stood beside the ruined wall with a hammer in his hand. He had not slept. Eliza knew that without asking. The sky held that cold gray light that makes men look older than they are. Colt drove the first nail into a new board. Hard. The sound carried across the empty pasture. Work had begun. Not patching. Rebuilding. Eliza hauled the salvaged lumber from the wagon. The boards were charred on one side but still strong enough. She set them beside him one by one. Neither spoke much. Hammer. Board. Nail. The shed slowly began to take shape again. A wounded thing learning how to stand. The gray gelding watched from the corral. The bay horse rested in the stall, bandaged leg held careful and high. Colt worked faster than a man should after a night like that. Not careless. Just driven. Every strike of the hammer carried something inside it. Anger. Loss. Decision. By mid-morning the wind shifted warm off the plains. It carried the distant sound of wagons on the county road. Eliza climbed down from the roof beam where she had been holding a brace. "You're not riding today." Colt kept hammering. Wasn't planning to. She wiped soot from her sleeve. "The final rodeo is 4 days away." "I know." His voice stayed flat. The hammer struck again. "But your horse. The bay will heal." "That's not what I meant." He stopped. Just once. Then drove the nail home. Eliza climbed down from the beam and stood beside him. "Barlow wanted you out before the rodeo." "Yes." "And now?" Colt tossed the hammer into the dirt and walked toward the barn. Eliza followed. Inside, the bay lifted its head when Colt entered. The horse's eyes softened. "Trust." Colt ran his hand slowly down the bandaged leg, checking the wrap, feeling the heat beneath. "Not riding him," Eliza said gently. Colt nodded. "Didn't say I would." She leaned against the stall rail. "You can't win the purse without a horse." He untied the gray gelding from the far stall and led it forward. The horse stepped careful over the straw. Not as fast as the bay, but solid. "Steady, Eliza," he said quietly. "This horse hauled freight wagons over mountain passes." She looked at the animal. Thick shoulders, calm eyes. A horse built for work, not glory. "You're going to ride him." Colt saddled the gray with slow deliberate motions, leather straps tightening. The saddle creaked as it settled. "He doesn't spook," Colt said. "Doesn't buck either." She folded her arms. "That's not how rodeos work." He swung the saddle horn once, testing, then met her eyes. "I'm not riding for the show." Outside the barn a wagon rattled past on the road again. Voices carried faint in the wind, news already spreading. A burn shed, a wounded horse, a ranch under pressure. Eliza felt it. The valley watching, waiting to see if Colt Mercer folded. "What are you riding for then?" she asked. Colt tightened the cinch. "For time." She understood slowly. The purse money from the final rodeo. Enough to push the debt. Enough to delay Barlow. Maybe not save the ranch, but keep it breathing. "You'll be riding against men on trained buckers," she said. Colt mounted the gray and settled into the saddle. The horse shifted once, then stood calm. "Good," Colt said. "Let them ride." He guided the gray out into the yard. The horse moved slow but sure. Colt turned him toward the practice ring beside the barn. A rough circle of packed dirt and old fence rails. Eliza followed to the rail. The wind lifted her hair as the gray stepped into the ring. Colt gave the reins a light touch, then nudged the horse forward. First a walk, then a trot. Not graceful, not flashy, but steady, solid. The kind of movement a man could trust when everything else broke loose. Eliza watched the way Colt sat the saddle. Balanced, still, like the horse was part of him. After 2 rounds Colt pulled the gray to a stop beside the rail. "You see it?" he asked. Eliza nodded slowly. The horse might not win applause, but he would not fail under pressure. "You're not riding to impress them," she said. "No. You're riding to stay alive." Colt looked toward the distant hills where Barlow's land began. "I'm riding to make sure he doesn't win." Eliza stepped into the ring and handed him the coiled rope lying near the gate. Colt caught it. Their fingers brushed for a moment. Warm. Alive. A small thing in the cold air. But something had changed between them. Not stranger in obligation anymore. Partners in a fight neither had chosen. Colt swung the rope once above his head. The loop cut a clean circle through the air. Eliza leaned against the rail watching. The ranch behind them still scarred from the fire. The barn quiet. The wind steady. And for the first time since Barlow's shadow had crossed the land, Colt Mercer was no longer standing still. The rodeo grounds filled before noon. Wagons lined the hill. Horses tied along the rails. Dust rolled across the arena like slow smoke. People had come for the final ride of the season. But whispers moved through the crowd before the announcer ever spoke. They had heard about Mercer's burn shed. About the wounded bay. About the debt that hung over the ranch like winter weather. Colt Mercer rode through the gate on the gray gelding. No applause. Just quiet watching. The gray moved steady beneath him. Not proud. Not fast. But sure-footed. Eliza stood along the rail near the timekeeper's stand. The tin box rested beside her boots. Inside it lay the ledger. The map. Every paper with Barlow's name written across another man's ruin. She watched Colt ride past without waving. He didn't look toward her, but he knew she was there. The announcer lifted his hat. Next rider, Colt Mercer. The crowd stirred. Some surprised, some doubtful. A few men laughed low when they saw the gray gelding. Not a rodeo horse, just a working animal. Colt said nothing. He adjusted the rope in his hand. Waited. Across the arena, William Harlan Barlow watched from the sponsor's platform. Black coat, silver watch chain. The same calm smile he wore when buying land from desperate men. Beside him stood the bank agent and the town sheriff. Respectable witnesses. Respectable power. The chute gate slammed open. A young bronc burst into the dirt. Wild. Fast. Colt's gray stepped forward. The rope flew. One clean loop. The bronc stumbled against the catch. Colt swung down and tied fast. Hands steady. No wasted motion. The crowd shifted. Not cheering yet, but watching harder. The gray gelding stood quiet while the bronc fought the rope. Colt mounted again and rode out of the ring. Timekeeper called the mark. Good. Not the fastest, but enough to place. The second event came after. Barrel run. Then steer wrestling. Colt entered both. Not flashy. Not reckless. Just steady. Each ride added a few more dollars to the purse. Each ride added a little more attention from the stands. By late afternoon the crowd had turned fully toward him. Not cheering loud, but leaning forward. Because men in towns like this understood something. A man fighting debt rode different. He rode like every second mattered. Eliza stepped toward the timekeeper as the final tally went up. Colt had placed in 3 events. Enough prize money to cover the bank note. Enough to stop the transfer. For now. The announcer raised his voice. Winner of the final purse, Colt Mercer. This time the applause came. Not thunder, but honest. Colt rode the gray toward the platform. Barlow waited there. Still smiling, but thinner now. Colt dismounted and climbed the steps. The purse money changed hands. A leather pouch heavy with coin. Barlow extended his hand. Congratulations, Mercer. Colt did not take it. Instead he reached into his coat and set the silver match safe on the platform table. The engraved letter caught the sun. The sheriff frowned. Barlow's smile held. But only just. Eliza stepped forward then. Tin box in both hands. She opened it. Laid the ledger beside the match safe. Then the map. Then the transfer papers. The crowd leaned closer. "What's this about?" the sheriff asked. Eliza's voice carried clear across the platform. "Evidence." She pointed to the ledger entries. To Barlow's name buying debt before ranches failed. Then to the map. 3 ranches taken this way already. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Men recognized those names. Neighbors. Friends. The sheriff looked at Barlow. Barlow's smile had vanished. "Circumstantial," he said coolly. Eliza lifted the final paper. The bank transfer with his signature. And the fence cutting. The fire. The match safe you dropped at Mercer's shed. She slid it across the table. Silence settled heavy over the arena. The sheriff picked up the silver case. Turned it in his hand. The engraved letter gleamed in the sun. Across the platform Colt Mercer stood still. Not threatening. Not angry. Just present. The kind of man the town knew well enough to believe. The sheriff looked back at Barlow. "Care to explain?" Barlow's eyes moved across the watching crowd. The ranchers. The farmers. Men who had begun to recognize the pattern. The smile did not return. For the first time in a long while, William Harlan Barlow had nowhere left to stand. The Mercer Ranch looked different in spring light. Snow had melted from the low hills. Grass pushed green through the pasture where winter had held too long. Fence lines stood straight again. New cedar posts spread against the earth. The burned shed had been rebuilt. Not perfect, but strong. Morning smoke drifted from the chimney of the house. Warm. Steady. Inside, the stove crackled with fresh wood. Coffee simmered slow in the pot. Eliza Hartwell stood at the table kneading bread dough. Flour dusted her sleeves. The kitchen window stood open to the soft wind. Outside, the gray gelding grazed near the rail. The bay horse moved easier now. Still favoring the leg, but healing. Colt Mercer stepped in from the yard. Boots muddy. Hands rough with fence wire. He set his hat on the same chair he always used. Eliza glanced up. Fence finished? He nodded once. The north line solid. She brushed flour from her hands and poured coffee into a tin cup. Set it beside him. Colt wrapped his hands around the warmth. The kitchen felt fuller now. Not louder. Just lived in. A second chair stayed pulled out at the table. A second cup waited each morning without needing to be asked for. Outside, a wagon creaked along the county road. Spring travelers moving west. Life starting again after a hard winter. Eliza leaned against the counter. The sheriff came by earlier. Colt raised one eyebrow. Barlow? Gone. The word hung in the warm air. He sold what land he still held and left town 2 days ago. Colt nodded slowly. Men like Barlow did not stay long where the truth had caught them. The valley would breathe easier without him. Eliza turned the dough once more. You'll still ride the circuit? Colt considered the question. The gray gelding lifted its head outside the window. Quiet. Patient. Colt shook his head. Not much reason now. The ranch had survived. The debt was cleared. The land was theirs again. Work waited here. Honest work. Eliza carried the bread pan to the stove. The smell of yeast and firelight filled the room. For a while they moved through the small tasks of morning. Wood added to the stove. Water carried from the pump. A saddle blanket hung to dry in the sun. Nothing dramatic. Just life settling into its rhythm. Later, Colt stepped out onto the porch. The prairie stretched wide beyond the fence lines. Green now. Alive. Eliza joined him a moment later. They stood side by side watching the wind move through the grass. No hurry. No tension. Just the quiet of a place that had found its balance again. Colt reached into his pocket. The folded marriage contract rested there. Still worn from the trail. He handed it to her. You never asked again. Eliza unfolded the paper slowly. The same words written months ago. The same promise that had brought her across 3 states. She looked up. You never offered. Colt rested his elbows on the porch rail. The wind tugged gently at his coat. This ranch always needed 2 people. Eliza steadied his face. The grief line's still there. But softer now. Less alone. She folded the contract once more and set it back in his hand. Then I suppose, she said quietly, the arrangement still stands. Colt gave the smallest nod. Not ceremony. Not speeches. Just a man accepting something steady and real. Behind them the bread rose warm in the kitchen. The horses moved slow in the pasture. And across the Mercer ranch, the long winter had finally ended. If this story stirred a memory or two, saddle up with us again, hit subscribe and help keep these old frontier tales alive. Out here, every name, every trail, every sunset still matters. So till we meet again, friend, keep your hat tipped to the past, and your heart pointed west.